Pseudopod number 73, January 18th, 2008. This week's story, Blood, Gridlock and PEZ by Kevin Anderson. Hello and welcome to Pseudopod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm your host, Alistair Stewart, and this week's story comes to us from Kevin Anderson. His work has appeared in numerous print and online markets including Death Grip, Exit Laughing, Darkness Rising, Surreal Magazine, once home to your humble host too, and most recently, he became the first American to be published in the South African horror magazine Something Wicked. This week's narrator, KJ Johnson, is part of the excellent Volcanicast, a weekly and very funny look at just what people have been looking for on Google, and was also part of the team that did this year's Nano Monkeys podcast that got many a NaNoWriMo writer through a long dark night of the plot. So wind your windows up and do not, under any circumstances, make eye contact, because I have a story for you, and I promise you it's true.
Blood, Gridlock and PEZ by Kevin Anderson. I hate birthdays. Not other people's, just mine. The universe, with its transcendent sense of humor, seems to gather up a year's worth of misery, and then on my birthday delivers the whole painful lot in one big annual cosmic joke that I never seem to get. On my 7th birthday, my dog was not just killed, but dragged under a car for almost half a mile, screaming. Our house burnt to the ground on my 10th birthday, and on my 11th, my dad split from my mom, leaving her with a black eye. My 16th birthday will always be the day I received my first sexual advance. A pretty momentous day for most, but for me it was the day I found out that many people thought I was gay. To make things worse, the guy making the advance also happened to be my uncle. I didn't stop throwing up for almost 6 months. But believe it or not, there is one birthday that trumps them all. One in which no amount of therapy could erode the images chiseled into my recall. On my 18th birthday, I found myself sitting on the highway, next to a corpse. Blood gathered in pools around the body as the afternoon sun gave it a sickly glimmer. I remember thinking how much the dark liquid really seemed to belong on the pavement. Like oil, transmission fluid, or neon green coolant, the blood was at home on the asphalt. It's amazing the things you notice when events force you to grow up in the span of a moment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story really starts 2 hours earlier, with Gina. "What the hell?" she said from the passenger seat of my 1998 four-door Mazda. We both gawked open-mouthed at a ball of flame that licked the sky about a half-mile ahead of us. The car accident, making all 5 lanes of the interstate a massive parking lot, had apparently become more serious. Even in the daylight, the soft glow from the fire cast an orange luster on my windshield. Thick mushrooms of black smoke rose up from the chaos and were bleeding into the afternoon sky. "There's no way that can be good," I said, as the whine of emergency vehicles sounded in the distance. "Jesus, Craig, we're never going to get there," Gina said. "How long have we been stuck?" Parked vehicles surrounded us, and the only thing that moved was an occasional highway patrol car or paramedic speeding past us along the shoulder. "About 20 minutes, I said. Feels like forever. Why can't they just move the bodies to the side of the road and open up a couple of lanes?" I was never in the dark about my first real girlfriend's insensitivity, but it was a rare occasion when it actually took voice. "Christ, Gina, people are probably dying up there." "Well, I'm dying here," Gina hissed, "and I have to pee." I reached over and held out my half-empty 7-Eleven Big Gulp. "1 container, no waiting." She looked at me as if I had just tossed dog shit on her shoes. "Have you ever had a straw shoved up your nose?" "That's why I love you, Gina," I said. "All that sweet pillow talk." "Go suck an elf," she said, folding her arms. A groggy voice floated up from behind us. "Are we there yet?" Pitt, my best friend, said from the back seat as he started to wake. It had been his idea to go to the LA Toy Convention, an easy 4-hour drive from our hometown of Delano, California. Knowing my luck with birthdays, Pitt wanted us to get out of town, reasoning that if anything bad was going to happen, at least we would be near the beach. Before Gina or I answered, Pitt's eyes flickered like dying light bulbs, then suddenly winked out as he fell back asleep. Growing up together, Pitt and I had developed the same fondness for toys, comic books, video games, and all other things that anchored us solidly in the harbor of our youth. Our hobbies didn't exactly endear either of us to the opposite sex, but they helped forge a bond between us, a bond I thought couldn't be broken. Then Gina came along. "Shit, he can sleep through anything," Gina said. "How would you know what he can sleep through?" Gina flicked her muddy brown hair and dealt me a steely, green-eyed glare. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" My response to this opening had been crafted about 2 weeks ago. I started working on it about the time I caught Pitt and Gina together at school. Nothing was incriminating about their manner. It was simply the fact that they were together at all. Until then, I was under the impression that they didn't much like each other's company, and only endured it on occasion for my benefit. Whenever he could, Pitt told me what a bitch she was, and Gina never missed an opportunity to call Pitt a loser. Seeing them together just didn't fit, unless I was missing something. The opening for my accusation had finally arrived, and I narrowed my eyes as a kind of launching pad for my well-rehearsed words. But as I opened my mouth, drawing in a breath, a car horn started to beep in rhythmic intervals. I believed the intensity of my gaze would transfix Gina, but the odd thumping of the horn stole her attention. She looked back over Pitt and out the back window. "I think someone's car alarm is going off." "Why would someone turn on a car alarm in a traffic jam?" "I don't know. There, 2 cars back. Do you see 'em?" Gina pointed. I reluctantly turned around, seeing nothing at first. But then the strangeness of the scene drew my gaze like lightning to a rod. 2 cars back and 1 lane over was a man ramming his forehead repeatedly into the horn on his steering wheel. "There's something you don't see every day," I said. "He's gone crazy." Gina was a big fan of stating the obvious. "Well, he is driving an El Camino. That's never been the trademark of sanity." The man, using his head as a percussion instrument, suddenly stopped and sat up abruptly. Then he began speaking, or possibly even yelling. We couldn't hear anything from where we were, but I do remember him looking as if he was an actor in a silent movie, exaggerating every pronunciation of whatever it was he was saying. "What do you think is wrong with him?" Gina said. "I don't know, or care. Maybe he has to pee." Gina turned back toward me. "Look, Craig, do you have something to say? Seriously, because this dancing around crap is getting old." My moment was gone, and I felt my courage leave me like helium escaping a ruptured balloon. She was now the aggressor, and I didn't feel very accusatory anymore, no matter what Gina and Pitt were doing behind my back. I sank a bit into my seat and reached into my shirt pocket. I removed a collectible Dumbo PEZ dispenser, one of the many toys we all collected. I quickly dispensed a grape candy and popped it into my mouth, then held the dispenser out to her. "PEZ?" It was the perfect peace offering. We had met in a PEZ chat room, talking about all the finer points and irrelevancies of stem colors. Knowing Gina, she thought the gesture romantic. The thin and tight lines bordering her mouth relaxed, opening back up into luscious pink lips. A silent moment passed as the rest of her features softened and her face started to resemble the girl I had fallen in love with. Just for a moment I was taken back, and I wondered if I could fix this. She took a candy and held it to her mouth, then suddenly gestured to the dispenser. "Doesn't that belong to Pitt?" "Yeah," I said, taking a deep breath. "I took it off him when he fell asleep. I'm holding it hostage until he kicks in for gas. Tired of him freeloading." I could tell she wanted to say something in Pitt's defense, but she hesitated, swallowing words as she pursed her lips. That's when I knew. Pitt and her were together, and this was not fixable. "You have something you want to tell me?" I said, not really sure if there was an answer I wanted to hear. Her lower lip dropped, quivering a bit. I thought for a moment she might even produce a tear, but then she suddenly looked out the back window. "What is he doing now?" "Who?" "That guy." She pointed over Pitt's sleeping head. My gaze followed, once again finding the man in the El Camino. He was now slamming his head against the driver's side window and still mouthing some unheard silver-screen dialogue. "Geez," I said, "somebody get a net." Gina shifted in her seat. "He really needs to switch to decaf." She started to laugh, then abruptly looked down at her seatbelt. "Damn!" "What?" "This belt hates me. It unbuckles whenever it wants to and sticks when I want out." She tried clicking the buckle back together, but it kept slipping apart. "At our current speed, I think you're pretty safe." "Just help me," she said. "Why don't you get this damn thing fixed?" I reached over, grabbing the buckle. "It's a bit tricky. You have to hold the button down and click it in before you release." Our hands touched, and before she could catch herself, she pulled hers away. Her reaction felt like a knife turning in my gut. Happy birthday to me. I finished securing her belt and turned around and faced forward. With my hands on the dashboard, I leaned into the steering wheel, gently resting my forehead on its rim. I wondered for a moment if Mr. El Camino had received any kind of satisfaction by slamming his head into the horn. "I know you don't love me anymore," I said. Gina let silence speak for her as she sat forward in her seat. "But do you even like me?" I felt her hand on my shoulder, and I tensed up, waiting for her to speak. But the next voice I heard was not Gina's. It was Pitt's. "Do you guys know there is a guy back here slamming his head against his window?" "Yes," Gina snapped. "Well, why do you think he's doing that?" Pitt said. "Why would anybody do that? Craig thinks he has to pee." "Wow," Pitt said. Gina turned to look back. "What?" "He just broke the window with his head," Pitt said. This got my attention. I sat up and spun around. The man in the El Camino was bleeding and rippling waves from his forehead. "Maybe someone should go see if he's all right," I said. "Are you nuts?" Gina's eyes met mine. "I didn't mean somebody us. I meant somebody else," I said, much harsher than I intended. Pitt must have detected something in my voice, because he turned toward Gina and me with a confused look blanketing his face. "Okay, what did I miss?" "Shut up, Pitt. Just shut up," Gina said. "Yep, definitely missed something." Pitt slumped into the back seat. Gina leaned in, but stayed just on the fringe of what psychologists refer to as my personal space. "Let's just have a nice day. We've all been looking forward to this for months. When we get back—" Gina didn't finish. Maybe it was the first time she was going to say it out loud, or maybe she just didn't want Pitt to know how she was going to phrase it. Hell, I didn't want to know how she was going to phrase it. I looked back at Pitt. He seemed to be catching up to what was going on, and I could tell he'd much rather his dance with the Sandman hadn't ended when it did. Pitt folded his arms across his chest, breathing deeply. He may have been preparing to say something, but the look of growing horror hanging on my face as I looked past him out the window must have given him pause. "Christ," I said, as Gina and Pitt both turned around to follow my gaze. Although I didn't see it happen, Mr. El Camino had gotten out of his car. He just seemed to appear standing outside, his right foot tapping on the white paint dividing lines. His hair was dark and disobedient in all directions except where the blood had matted it to the scalp. His eyes were open to the point of absurdity. They were huge white spheres that would have been more at home in a cartoon character. When he started to take a step forward, it was awkward and jerky, like the darting movements of the Keystone Cops in a Max Sennett silent comedy. I would have expected Buster Keaton or that great Charlie Chaplin to join him on screen if it hadn't been for the axe he gripped like some Spartan warrior. The splashes of dried blood on the stainless steel blade and Mr. El Camino's now audible ranting shattered any illusion that what I was watching was a classic from the golden age of silent film. I can't recall the rest of that afternoon in a continuous stream of events, complete with living characters moving from scene to scene in cinematic transition. It's more like still images in a slideshow I'd prefer not to watch. I have a mental picture of him leaning down and peering into the passenger window of the vehicle next to his El Camino. He screamed at the glass, leaving speckled dots of saliva on the window. The woman on the other side of the glass, amazingly enough, was trying to ignore Mr. El Camino. Sitting in the front passenger seat of an all-terrain vehicle, she turned her head away and continued talking to the man in the driver's seat. The driver was also doing his best not to make eye contact with the screaming maniac. They both seemed to live in a place where the credo is, if you don't look at crazy people, they don't exist. I have to believe that the couple would have reacted differently had they been able to see the axe. Mr. El Camino held it slightly behind him, and from the couple's point of view his presence was merely an annoyance, like a homeless guy threatening to clean their windshield with a soiled newspaper. But we saw it, and the 20 or so people looking on from various vehicles saw it. We all saw it. We saw it, and did nothing. Paralyzed with some sick fascination of impending violence, we all peered outward like patrons at a drive-in waiting for the horror movie to move beyond the opening credits. It hadn't occurred to anyone to venture outside to offer assistance, or at the very least yell a warning to the couple. For the moment we all harbored the same illusion. the illusion of safety one feels when tucked comfortably in a car with the windows rolled up, like children hiding under the covers to ward off the mythical claws of the closet monster. The equation, wide-eyed maniac plus blood-stained axe equals broken windshield, seemed to elude everyone for the moment, and I include myself in that mass ignorance, at least until the first windshield imploded, and the axe planted deep inside the woman's face. "Holy did you see that?" Pitt said. "It's time to leave," I announced, as dozens of people around us came to the same conclusion. I opened my door, stuck out my foot, and immediately felt a severing pain just above my ankle. The door of the Chevy truck in the next lane had been flung open with more vigor than mine. The collision of doors in a rising panic sent mine swinging back, closing on my leg. A wave of people rushed by, and riding the surf was Pitt. I caught a glimpse of him as he sailed by, having better navigated his escape through one of the rear doors. When there was a break in the stream of panic, I pushed the door open again, stepping out on my injured leg. I immediately turned back, half expecting to see the business end of the axe already too close to fend off. But what I saw instead was the man from the crimson SUV, who had gotten out of his vehicle, make his way around to confront Mr. El Camino. Or maybe he was going to try and render some kind of aid to his passenger, now hemorrhaging in long red streams from what was once a human face. When he got there... Wait. The next few moments are bathed in images I don't wish to immerse myself. So let's just shuttle ahead past the next few and pick up the action as Mr. El Camino withdraws his axe from the man's lifeless chest. "My portfolio is diverse. Cha-ching, cha-ching, you must diversify," Mr. El Camino screamed. I'm at best paraphrasing the dialogue of Pitt, Gina, and myself, as the years and drink have eroded the surplus details of that day. But no paraphrasing of Mr. El Camino's words will ever be necessary. Each one has a permanent, almost reverent place in my recall, like a chiseled epitaph on a family gravestone. They are forever with me. "When you don't diversify, you get screwed. Cha-ching!" Mr. El Camino continued as he brought the axe down hard on the windshield of his own car. Running southbound, I looked ahead and could see Pitt standing about 20 yards away on the left shoulder. He hadn't completely abandoned me, but he wasn't coming back for me either. I started scanning for Gina. She could run faster than both of us, and I figured she was a quarter-mile away by now. When I reached Pitt, I kept searching. Didn't see her on the left shoulder. "Are you okay?" Pitt said, sounding generally concerned. "Yeah, I'm good. Where's Gina?" I said, gazing across the highway to the other shoulder. She wasn't there either. "Don't know. Thought she was with you." I took a deep breath. "Figured you both would be up ahead of..." And that's when it started to dawn on me. I had seen Pitt get out of the car, but I hadn't seen... My stomach seized up tight as I turned around. Oh, God. I hadn't seen Gina get out of the car because she hadn't. My eyes widened as I stared back at her panicked frame, tugging frantically at her seatbelt. In the all-consuming rush of self-preservation, Pitt and I had left her there. Couple of real heroes we were. "She can't get the buckle unlatched," I said. "Come on." I motioned Pitt to follow me, but when I gazed back, he hadn't moved a step. His jaw quivered and his eyes were frozen in an unblinking gape. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he just didn't hear me. "Pitt, come on!" Pitt shook his head slowly, eyes still unblinking. Son of a bitch. So there I was, about to rush toward an axe-wielding maniac to try to save my girlfriend, who has been banging my best friend. And should I be successful in this venture, the one who will most likely benefit is my best friend, the same asshole who won't even take a step in her direction. I turned away from Pitt, disgusted. As I started my journey back toward Gina, I knew that if there had ever been a bigger schmuck in all of existence, surely his 18th birthday hadn't been as crappy as this one. By this time, Mr. El Camino had finished demolishing most of the glass in his own car, and he was ready to move on. He staggered toward an abandoned Toyota just behind my car. I figured I had less than a minute before he would move forward again and notice Gina. If I stayed low and quiet, Mr. El Camino might not observe my approach. I could slip Gina out of my car, and we could both be standing next to Pitt before Mr. El Camino was through demolishing the Toyota. It was a nice plan. I'll never know if it would have worked. When I was about 6 car lengths away, Gina looked up and saw me. "Craig! Help! I can't get..." I shushed her by holding my finger to my lips as I ran, but it was too late. Mr. El Camino spun on his heel, glaring in her direction. He withdrew the axe from the Toyota's windshield, sending large chunks of safety glass down onto the asphalt. "My credit is spotless. Run it. You'll see. Cha-ching!" He strolled toward my car, broken glass crackling under his boots. When he reached the passenger window, he leaned over, peering in. Gina brought her hands up to fend off the man's gaze. "You cost me my line of credit, you bitch," he said. "It's not nice to mess with a man's livelihood." He brought the axe up on his shoulder, like a baseball player taking a batter's stance. I knew then I wasn't going to get there in time. My mental picture of him swinging the blade downward into the side window, sending glass shards spraying inward, still wakes me up in the middle of the night. I was still 20 or so feet away, and my heart sank as an image of Gina's lifeless body filled my imagination. But the image faded as Gina's head rose up into view. She had dove under the dashboard, narrowly missing the axe, and now squirmed to avoid the blade again as Mr. El Camino pulled it from the car. The maniac reared back, weapon held high, preparing for another blow. I didn't think Gina could dodge another swing of the blade, so I executed the first idea that popped into my head. Get his attention. Without much thought, I pulled something out of my shirt pocket and let it fly. "Hey, asshole!" I shouted. Now, Pitt and I had been throwing PEZ dispensers at each other since we were 8. With a fully loaded dispenser, we both had the deadly accuracy of South American bushmen with spears. Dumbo wasn't fully loaded, but close enough. The dispenser tumbled through the air, head over end. Dumbo's wide ears offered the perfect amount of resistance and counterbalance to the lighter stem. Mr. El Camino turned toward me just in time to see a pair of plastic elephant ears and a curled trunk hurtling toward him. Dumbo hit El Camino in the forehead, just off center. The surprise on his face must have been mirrored on mine as our eyes met. The mental slide I have of this scene reminds me of a cell from a cartoon. That single moment when Elmer Fudd, with shotgun in hand, finally notices that wascally wabbit, Bugs Bunny, right smack dab in the middle of wabbit season. "Do you know what it takes to build a well-diversified portfolio? Cha-ching, cha-ching," Mr. El Camino said, stepping toward me. I stopped moving forward about 6 feet from him, a distance I hoped was out of axe range. "No, not really." "I have perfect credit." He pointed to himself and took another step. "I have Diners Club and a platinum card. Cha-ching." "That's pretty sweet," I nodded. "But they say I'm spent." He took another step and I caught a whiff of blood still dripping from his scalp. "Who says?" "They cancel my card the same day they send me an application for a new one. Cha-ching! That says I'm pre-approved." Spray from his saliva fell just short of my shoes. I was definitely within axe range. "That's a real bitch," I said, taking a step back. "I have perfect credit." He gripped the axe handle with both hands. I saw his knuckles turning white, and his whole body started to quiver, much like I imagine a volcano would right before exploding. I started to take another step back. "Look, I believe—" My words trailed off as I watched Mr. El Camino rear up with the axe. In that split second before he swung, 2 choices flashed in my mind. Move forward or move back. Mystifying to me even today, I rushed forward and reached for the axe handle just as he swung. My left hand missed the wood stock, but my right caught it firmly. I tried to twist the weapon outward, but Mr. El Camino brought the butt of the handle up fast, catching my chin. I staggered back against the hood of a station wagon. I was dazed, but still had enough sense to move as the axe blade smashed down next to me. I heard the metal-slicing crash of the weapon cutting into the station wagon's hood. My quick dodge sent me tumbling to the asphalt, sprawled between the station wagon's front bumper and the ass end of a box truck. I caught approaching metal in my peripheral vision and ducked. The axe sliced through the air above my head. The blade embedded into the wooden roll-away door of the truck with a thud. El Camino ripped the axe violently out of the door, sending wood fragments and dust into my face. He brought the axe up again, and I rolled under the bumper of the truck, hoping it was wide enough to conceal my frame. The blade crashed down on the truck's metal bumper. Sparks flew overhead like a fireworks display, and even in the afternoon light they left trace lines in my vision for a few seconds. He raised the axe again, and I noticed that my feet were inches from his leg. It was time for a little offense. I kicked at his knee hard, connecting squarely. Now, in action films I had seen this move send bad guys tumbling to the ground dozens of times. allowing Bruce Willis or Jackie Chan those precious moments they needed to regain their feet and take control of the situation. Apparently, Mr. El Camino hadn't seen any of those movies. He paused for a moment, setting the axe on his shoulder. Raising an eyebrow, he glanced down at his knee. At least my Nancy Boy kick had registered with him. Not with the result I was going for, but I did gain a moment. It was a moment I could have used to scurry under the truck for cover, but just as I started to move, I caught a glimpse of a pair of feet moving behind Mr. El Camino. I immediately recognized those checkerboard pattern Keds. It was Gina. She must have solved her seatbelt problem and was now moving in to help me. I could see her tiptoeing behind the maniac, and I wondered what her plan could be. There was a variety of heavy objects in my car she could use to smash him on the head. Full cans of Red Bull, my granddad's wrench, even a brick I used when parking on a hill. All I had to do was keep this guy's attention until she could finish sneaking up behind him But as I watched her checkerboard Keds get farther and farther away, a sinking feeling came over me. Son of a chicken shit bitch. I gazed up at Mr. El Camino, and his head tilted a bit, eyes narrowing, and I imagined him saying, "Hey, remember me?" The axe came off his shoulder, and just for an instant I entertained the idea of not dodging the blow. Just let the finely crafted Sears and Roebuck's blade split my skull open and avoid months of pain and feeling pitifully sorry for myself. A birthday present to me, wrapped up and delivered by a friendly axe-wielding nutjob. But in that moment, as I wondered if life was worth living, words of wisdom filtered down from an unlikely source. Mr. El Camino. Women can diminish a man's financial diversity. It's economic castration. Cha-ching! Yeah, I had no idea what that meant. But in that single insane moment, his words spoke to me. It's like when Frank Sinatra starts doing that doobie-doo-wah stuff. Nobody knows what the hell he's saying, but everybody seems to get it. El Camino swung the axe, and I ducked. The blade crashed into the steel bumper again, sending sparks flying. He reared back for another assault, and I could tell by his stance that he was taking new aim. No longer interested in removing my head, he swung at a sharper angle, targeting my legs. I curled my feet up into a fetal position, banging my knees on the truck's undercarriage. The blade clipped the bottom of my shoes, then embedded deep into the truck's wide rear tire. There was an explosion of air, and I felt rubber pelt my cheek. It stung like a bitch, but I ignored it and started to squirm further under the truck. El Camino didn't seem fazed by the explosion. He pulled the axe away from the exposed rim and took another fast swing. It was a wild effort, and it went wide, cutting into the asphalt next to my hip. "High-return stocks can be elusive," he said as he crouched down. I had managed to scoot my entire body under the truck, no longer accessible by axe. I hoped that he'd move on in search of more easily dispatched victims. No such luck. He reached a hand under the truck, clawing at my feet. I kicked at him and continued to move away, my forehead scraping on a filthy muffler, and I felt dark gunk layer my face. "I am not over my limit," he said as he seized my shoe. I kicked it off just as he started to pull me toward him, but his free hand grasped my other ankle, and I felt his grip tighten. I started sliding across the pavement, and I looked for something to grab. My hands clapped tight at the rear axle, which, to my surprise, is one of the greasiest things you can grab under a vehicle. I really wish I had taken some auto shop in high school. My hands slid down the slimy shaft as Mr. El Camino dragged me out with very little effort. He let my feet slap to the ground once my head was exposed to the sun once again, and he moved to pick up his axe. I sat up fast and immediately felt dizzy. My body was about done. Up until this point, my life consisted of sitting on the couch, playing video games, shopping for PEZ dispensers on eBay, and sending Gina obscene text messages. Besides the occasional 1.5-minute roll in the hay with my soon-to-be ex-girlfriend, I didn't engage in a lot of physical activity. If this adrenaline-induced madness didn't end soon, I was going to puke. El Camino scooped up his weapon and turned toward me again, just as I started to taste vomit in the back of my throat. He stood at my feet, raising the axe slowly over his head. He was preparing a straight-on, split-me-down-the-middle blow to end this cartoon. That's all, folks. I lay, still breathing heavily, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my temples. I wanted to move, but exhaustion was starting to win me over. I threw my hands up and yelled, "Wait!" El Camino's insane eyes narrowed and his head tilted like a confused dog. The axe hung in the air, ready to descend and take my life, but for the moment he was still, like some murderous statue sculpted just for me. The next words out of my mouth had to be brilliant. They had to traverse the abyss of madness and somehow bring him over to the side of sanity, the side where people didn't think it reasonable to slaughter people on the highway with an axe. I opened my mouth, hoping that brilliance was about to emerge. It didn't. "It's my birthday," I said in a trembling voice. Mr. El Camino took these words in, and I could almost see them being processed. His head bobbed a bit, one eye twitched. It was like watching a broken machine, wheels and gears still grinding away, but unable to complete their tasks. His eye stopped twitching, and he stared at me. His head suddenly became still, and I thought just for an instant he looked like a man who had just returned from a long and relaxing trip. His mouth opened slowly, and I prepared myself for more of his financial nonsense, but his next words were utterly and completely sane. "Happy birthday," he said. It was the only birthday wish I would get all day. I sat up slowly, trying to split my gaze evenly between the man's face and his axe. "Thank you," I mumbled. El Camino took a long breath, and as he blew the air out, his face returned to that of an insane person, eyes going wide, murderous grin cutting a path under blood-spotted cheeks. His knuckles turned pearl white as he raised the axe toward the sun. I wanted to dodge the blow. I know I was going to try, but I also knew that whatever speed I had used to get this far was gone. I held my breath and waited. Then I heard two distinct pops, like distant firecrackers going off in succession. I was marginally aware of fast-moving objects passing overhead, but didn't have any idea what they could be until the tiny holes in the front of El Camino's shirt started to line themselves with blood. His blood. He had been shot. Mr. El Camino dropped to his knees, making it possible for me to see someone standing behind him. It was the youngest highway patrol officer I had ever seen. He didn't look old enough to go to his junior high prom, let alone hold a 9mm pistol in a practice stance, smoke drifting out of the muzzle. For the second time that afternoon, my look of surprise was mirrored on someone else's face. I stared at the cop, my mouth hanging open. If I live 100 years, I swear I will never utter the phrase, "Where is a cop when you need one?" I lost that privilege. I think the officer might have said something, but an explosion of pain emanating from my left foot kept me from registering it. Mr. El Camino's dying hands had let the axe slip. The blunt end landed so hard it separated the sole of my shoe from the canvas. Even in death, El Camino was still swinging. 2 hours later, a paramedic determined, much to my surprise, that my foot was unbroken. Hospital x-rays backed up his on-the-scene assessment, but I think they all missed something. Every once in a while, even 4 years later, I'll feel an unyielding urge to limp. I imagine a small, permanent fracture deep inside the bone, so deep x-rays can't find it. Maybe they aren't meant to. I hobbled over to the shoulder, where Mr. El Camino lay quietly under a yellow tarp. I sat down next to the body, as if we were old friends, and in a way we were. To paraphrase Oscar Wilde, at least this friend tried to stab me in the front. Although my birthday had been rough, Mr. El Camino's day had been a bit worse. The newspapers would report that Mr. Alec El Camino Harrison, an airline mechanic at Fresno International, had recently become widowed by his own hand. Earlier that morning he had chopped his wife into a dozen pieces and tenderly placed each part into a gift-wrapped box. He then deposited the packages in front of night drops at several local banks. The articles never made mention of Mr. Harrison's financial situation. On the day of the event, he had just turned 42. Happy birthday. "The girl in the ambulance says this belongs to you," the young officer that had saved my life said, holding out a Dumbo PEZ dispenser. Up close, Officer Brink didn't look as young as he did when I first saw him, but he could still pass for a high school senior in a 21 Jump Street kind of way. "Thanks," I said, taking the toy from the officer. "Now that the paramedics are done with you, my sergeant wants to get your statement." He pointed to a burly, very in-charge-looking cop just outside the ambulance. I could see Pitt in the back with Gina, who was having her head looked at. Her hair was full of glass, and she had a few cuts on her scalp, but nothing scarring. "I'll be there in a minute," I said. The officer nodded, then turned on a heel and left me to my thoughts. Gina's father picked her up at the hospital later that evening, and outside of a police station and news footage, I never really saw her again. About 6 months ago, she sent me an instant message. I stared at the greeting on my screen for almost an hour, but never responded. Didn't see any point. I'm not sure how long she and Pitt lasted after that day. Pitt never talked about it, and I sure as hell wasn't going to ask. He and I keep in touch, but it got harder after graduation. My childhood friend still sends me an email now and again, from whatever part of the world he's in. Last I heard, he was diving with sharks off the Australian coast. Just the latest in daredevil stunts, like his base jump off the Eiffel Tower. There's video on YouTube somewhere. I never looked. I'm not really sure what he is chasing with all these idiotic stunts. Maybe it's courage. Maybe it's something else. As for me, I never attempted another trip to the LA Toy Convention that year or any other. After that day, I was kind of done with toys, comic books, and even video games. I never realized how much money I had been pissing away on all that crap until I stopped. Nowadays, my funds are well managed in a very versatile portfolio with stocks, CDs, and even a bit of real estate. You see, the key to a really well-built portfolio is diversification. Cha-ching, cha-ching.
Because I'm a little slow with such things, it's taken me, embarrassingly, 31 years to realise that the whole point of an education is that it's a starting point. Bear with me, I am going somewhere. Case in point, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, arguably, with The Breakfast Club, the seminal 80s teen movie. Matthew Broderick, at the near height of his powers, there is, it should be said, near ultimate War Games love in this house. Mia Sara and Alan Ruck, the uncrowned king of that movie, and surely the only man on Earth who can boast both the captaincy of the Enterprise B and getting to use Citizens of Gotham as a conversational opener in the excellent Spin City. I saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off for the very first time recently, and Ferris's much touted philosophy, namely, life moves pretty fast. If you don't slow down every once in a while, you might miss it. It is good advice, unless you find yourself 3 doors up from a maniac with an axe. Nothing is as thick or strong as you think it is, and that includes the niceties of human society. There's a consensus belief that everything's going to work out. As long as you subscribe to that, a lot of the time it does. But that's all it is, a consensus, an idea, an unspoken understanding. Underneath that, there's nothing but darkness and base animal instincts, which is probably not what John Landis was aiming for when he made the film, but there you go. Of course, one of the basest instincts is the desire to ask for money, and that's what I'm going to do now. Pseudopod relies on your donations to pay its authors, so if you like this story, please go to pseudopod.org and click on Feed the Pod. Promise you won't regret it. Pseudopod is a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 license. And Pseudopod wants you to remember, the rabbits are us.